If you're old enough to remember when phones had cords and the only thing that went viral was a cold, then you're in the right place. Welcome to the Big 6-0 with Kaylee Harris and Guy Rawlerson. Because who better to discuss life's second act than two people who still think mature is a type of cheese?
Well, welcome to the Big 6-0 podcast. It's great to have your company. And if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. And a big hello also to our regular listeners. We really appreciate your support as always. Now, joining us this week on the podcast is Warren Davies, who has the title, The Unbreakable Farmer. Now, Warren is a father of 5, he's a grandfather as well, and he's a mental health advocate, particularly for rural communities. But his message resonates across all geographics and all demographics, which is why we wanted to have a chat to him as well today. Warren grew up in Melbourne. I'm going to give you a bit of his background. He grew up in Melbourne, and then in his mid-teens, his parents moved to a farm in regional Victoria. Warren wasn't doing too well at school, so in Year 9, following a discussion with the teachers, it was decided that it was best for Warren to leave school, and he went into farming, which is amazing, coming from a city boy, growing up in a milk bar in Melbourne, to a farm out in a regional area. And then that culminated in the purchase of his first farm, 200 acres, when he was about 22. Now, I've just crammed a whole lot of your life in there. But I just wanted to sort of paint a bit of a picture. Warren, hello.
G'day, how are you?
Thank you so much for being with us. The story that I've just told about you growing up, is there anything you would like to add to that? Because there were some really poignant moments in that time when you talk about you were bullied at school.
Yeah.
And that point where you moved out to the farm to when you bought your first farm, tell us about that.
Well, I was growing up in Melbourne, as mum and dad were small business owners, so we moved around a fair bit. And I think one of the things in hindsight that I now realise is that I struggled with my mental health from an early age, and that was around self-esteem and anxiety, I suppose.
Did you realise at the time you were struggling with it though?
Look, now in hindsight I do, but at the time, no, it just felt like it was, I wasn't, it wasn't something that stood out. But I now realise when there's a few things that pop up in my mind, where I can remember one day Mum dropping me off at the post office to post some letters for her, and I got to the door of the post office, froze, turned around and went back to the car and said, they haven't got any stamps today, to Mum, because I was and that's the anxiety that was, and that low self-esteem of not having, so that was something that was present, didn't really acknowledge. And I think that forms a really, an underlying theme to my story for the rest of my life, is probably not acknowledging, understanding, or sticking my hand up and asking for help. So that bullying at school really had an impact on my mental health and well-being, and that low self-esteem and anxiety all just built up. So when Mum and Dad moved from the city, it was like a way of reinventing myself. But I always had an attraction to agriculture, because we had friends that were dairy farmers down in Gippsland in Victoria. Mum had an uncle who was a dairy farmer in northern Victoria. We always spent time, school holidays, and I spent a lot of time down there on weekends and school holidays. I love farming, but farming to me at that stage was more about slug guns, tractors and motorbikes. It wasn't about cows or anything like that, but that ended up being one of the loves of my life.
As a kid, was it apparent to you that you had problems with anxiety, or are these things that sort of came to you later in life and you look back and say, oh my gosh, I didn't realise?
Yeah, probably. I was always that odd kid out, and that's one of the other things that I identified later on, and it was actually when I did my speaker course, when we unpacked our stories. And now I look back and, I was always that odd kid out, but that was probably one of the things that was holding me back, was that anxiety, because I either didn't feel worthy or didn't, fit in with that group or whatever it was. So it's something in hindsight I look back, but definitely that anxiety, it's a perfect example of taking my youngest daughter back to where I went to school. during COVID, we had to break in a lockdown, so we snuck down to Melbourne to see two of our other kids, and we did a bit of a tour where I grew up. And I went to the school, and we walked up to the gates of this quadrangle at the school, and I had a physical reaction. It was like someone had stuck a handful of rusty nails in my mouth. It was like a metallic taste in my mouth, because I hadn't been back there since I'd left that school. And just walking up to those gates was enough to go, oh, yeah, this is the place, kind of thing. And it was, and so now realising all those things, it was a pretty challenging time. And moving to the country was fantastic, though. It was a way of reinventing myself. But yeah, as you said, I was struggling at school.
So you moved to the country. Life is good. You're living on a farm with your folks, playing in the local footy team. You managed to get some friends around you and a girlfriend. Then I love how you say this, Mother Nature, your silent business partner, intervenes, and I'm sure everyone on the land can agree with what you say there, and things turn sour. What happened?
Yeah, so Mother Nature threw me a few curveballs. Wasn't expecting that. So as a naive 22-year-old going into a farming business with mum and dad, family businesses can have their ups and downs. Went into business with the bank as well because they lent me the money. But obviously my silent business partner, as I say, is Mother Nature, and I didn't really pay her enough respect or understood the full ramifications of her curveballs that she could throw. So when those curveballs started coming at me, that underlying theme to my story started to appear. Well, the first actual occasion was a flood. And the way I describe that is everything that I dealt with as a kid or didn't deal with as a kid all just literally come flooding back. And it created like this cloud above my head. And that underlying theme of not asking for help started to appear. So I didn't ask for help. I just thought, well, I'm a farmer, I'm a male, I'm tough. I've got to just, pick myself up and dust myself off and show true resilience. And I've really got a bad relationship with that word, resilience, and we might be able to talk about that a bit later. But so I just kept forging forward, and then we ended up having a family bust up on the farm, which had a massive impact on me because family's my number one value. So when my mum and dad's and my relationship completely broke down, that had a massive impact on me, and that cloud that was following me burst. And it turned into a spiral, and I fell into that spiral and didn't have tools and strategies in my toolbox that I've got now, and had no way of grabbing hold of that edge of that spiral, and I just started to slowly fall into it. And then obviously Mother Nature, from there we set out on a 10-year plan of how to buy mum and dad out of the farm and thrive in business, which we were doing. But then Mother Nature threw me another curveball, and that was a drought. And that was that broke me emotionally, physically, financially, the whole bit. I was broken. And, it was something that, once again, didn't stick my hand up and ask for help. And now I look back at my flood recovery plan, my 10-year plan, my plan through my drought. I did what I was meant to do as a bloke, particularly, and as I was tarred with the brush twice, I suppose. I'm a bloke and a farmer. So I did what I was meant to do. I picked myself up, I dusted myself off and kept moving forward. But nothing in those plans, the recovery from the flood or the 10-year business plan, had anything built in about the number one asset in my business and in my family, and that was me. And that was my biggest downfall. And so I hit rock bottom from there, and, I was broken.
That concept, as you say, you're a bloke, you're a farmer, and we're of a similar age,
yeah.
And we were probably all brought up with that whole, you don't air your dirty laundry. Everyone else has got problems as well,
yeah.
And that sticks with you. It's something that we probably find hard to come and speak to someone about. At what point do you say to yourself, I've got to do something, but I'm not sure what I've got to do, but I've got to speak to someone? At what point do you say, I need help or I need to speak to someone?
So my situation was probably, or it would be no different to anyone else that was in a similar situation in business like I was. So my business was failing, and I had 3 years of drought built into my 10-year plan, and I just moved into the 6th year of that drought. So it's no different to any other business that's facing any other challenges. And so my thing was I had to work harder and longer to try and overcome that challenge. And so you couple that with this spiralling out of control mental health condition, it's like tipping petrol on a fire, and eventually it's going to explode. And that's what it did for me. So why I do what I do now is because I don't want anyone to tip petrol on that fire and get it to explode, because I had to hit rock bottom to be able to realise that I need help here. And that was something that I realised, but I was too busy just trying to make ends meet. And I believed going through that drought, I had 3 things that I had to achieve that would be, I would be achieving my goals. So if I looked after my cows, looked after my farm, that would help me and enable me to look after my family. And by the time I'd got to that 6th year of that drought, I couldn't do any of those 3 things, and I felt like a failure, and there's a lot of shame and guilt around that. And look, I talk to many people around Australia, and you don't necessarily need to be a farmer, you can just be in business, and you get to that stage, and like you said, Guy, where from that age group where you don't go and who do you go and talk to, and you don't want to show that sign of weakness, and I think that's one of the things that the biggest learnings from my journey is around that communication and connection. Don't isolate yourself, and you need to talk, and I didn't do any of those things, and that's that underlying theme that started back when I was that kid, where I didn't stick my hand up when I was bullying, I didn't tell mum and dad, I didn't confide in anyone, teachers or anyone. I just accepted that was part of it. And that bullying now, it's something that I've done a lot of work on that, but every time I talk about right back at the age of 7 when I started at a new school, when those kids were, when I was asked to go up the front of the room to do a math sum, and I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed. And I still don't realise why there's X and Y's in mathematical sums anyway. I don't understand that stuff.
No one needs that stuff.
And I can remember, I can still clearly, and like as I'm saying this now, and I talk about this, multiple times a week, I get goosebumps. The kids were throwing seeds from the back of the room. And it was, you're a dumb kid, you're the dumb new kid, you're this. And I'd grown up in Cockatoo, up in the hills in the Dandenongs around Melbourne, so they'd call me hillbilly and all this. And those seeds planted in the back of my head. And even today, and even with my toolbox now, those seeds sometimes germinate, sitting, walking onto a stage, doing a talk at the moment, I've got strategies in place to be able to get me onto that stage, because all of a sudden my internal dialogue will start saying, "What are you doing, Warren? Who are you to think you should be standing in front of these people?" And so those seeds start to germinate. So I've got to have tools to be able to deal with those, and all that stems from way back at that kid. And it still goes through today. And a lot of people that I talk to have similar stories. And because we were from that age group, we don't get to talk. Don't talk about it. Just suck it up and don't talk. And look, and that's a real male thing, but it's also females as well. I talk to a lot of ladies and the same thing. Well, I was just told to I was dealing with this, but I was just told to sit there and be quiet, kind of thing, coming from that age group. Now, we need to talk about that stuff.
So you talk about, you've mentioned a couple of times now about hitting rock bottom. What did rock bottom look like for you when you got there?
Oh, it's a very scary place, a dark, scary place, which I got to a stage where I believed that the world was better off without me. And that was, I suppose that's the thing that really drives my mission today, is that being in that dark, scary place where you think your only option's not to be here, it's really life-changing. And I call that moment in my life my 2 feet of perspective, where that change in a moment in time really changed my life, because it gave me a whole new perspective on life. And And actually life gave me two choices that day. I was either continue this spiral out of control or could choose to be better, and I chose to be better that day. And that was, it's still, and I talk to so many people that have been in a similar situation. I'm fortunate I'm here to tell that story. But it's something that really drives my mission, because so many people have been in that position, and whether that's through a loss of a business, whether it's a loss of a partner, or whether that's just a loss of identity in general, or just, those challenges that we all face in life, it's something that, we really, we don't talk about enough, and we can get ourselves into that spiral and into that dark place where we feel there's no other option.
We mentioned just prior to coming on air, that sense of isolation, whether you're on the land or, as you say, you may have lost a partner, you may have lost your identity through the loss of a job or business. What does isolation do to a person? And you mentioned resilience. What does resilience mean? How do you work through that?
I'll go to the loneliness bit first, Guy. Someone actually said to me at an event the other night, like, I see people in the office all day say, "G'day." You can be surrounded by people and still be isolated. And now looking back, as a kid, that's what I was. I was surrounded by people. I had a lot of people really paying a lot of attention to me at lunchtime some days. It wasn't pleasant. So I was surrounded. I wasn't isolated. So there's loneliness, and you can choose to be alone too. Some people, it's a part of their toolbox is just some alone time, whether it's going, just sitting in a quiet room, or whether that's going out the bush for a few days just to totally disconnect. Like, that can be a strategy in your toolbox. So loneliness, like isolation, is totally different, where you just feel like there's a barrier around you. And the best way to describe that, it's like you're walking around in this bubble and no one can come in and you can't get out, type of thing. And it's it's a really challenging thing for lots of people. And then obviously from rural, regional and remote communities like that I do a lot of my work in, there's that physical isolation, or the isolation, by kilometres as well, which is another challenge. We talk about resilience, so I've got a really shitty relationship with resilience, and I've written some words around that just recently. And so resilience is about bouncing back from challenges and doing what you're meant to do. So one of the words that gets bandied around a lot is resilience, and a lot of people that I talk to now are over that word, particularly in communities that have been impacted by disasters. And you're resilient, and it feels like a pat on the back, just as so the people that are patting you on the back feel better. So I talk a lot more about building capacity now and having that toolbox. Resilience to me is not so much a character trait; it's just it's an action that's born out of lack of other options. And that's what happened to me. Flood, family bust up, hitting rock bottom, drought, all those things. I just picked myself up and dusted myself off. So the true sense of resilience, particularly as a farmer, just pick yourself up, dust yourself off, keep moving forward. But unless you couple that with tools and strategies in your toolbox, eventually you'll run out of dust, and you've got no dust to dust off yourself, and you end up hitting rock bottom. And so that's why I like to talk now. And resilience, persistence and determination are three of my key words. So resilience is still part of my story, but we need to flip that narrative around that word, because it's an overused word, like a lot of words these days get overused, and start talking about building capacity, so we can build tools in our toolbox now, whatever challenge that we're facing, but it'll also equip us to face the next challenge that we might face, which is inevitable, better and stronger, because we've got those tools already.
Going back to the farm for a second, and please forgive my naivety as a city dweller, but flood, drought, bushfires, all those sorts of things, don't farmers know that is part of life on the land?
Look, it is. It's farming's the purest.
And I mean that. I'm not trying to.
No, farming's the purest form of gambling. It really is. It is. But the thing is you do face these things from time to time, and we know that they're coming. But it's the way everything, like everything's so much fast paced now. Like you've got to get bigger. In business, a lot of farms are bigger, and employ people, so the pressures are greater. So everyone knows that these things are coming, and you are prepared. But as I said, in my 10-year plan, I had 3 years built into my 10-year plan of drought, because I knew drought was going to be a part of that. And as an irrigated dairy farm from Northern Victoria, 3 years was plenty. I was probably one of the most securest farmers on the planet. But as I said, it moved into the 6th year, and you can't plan for that stuff. And regardless, like it's at the moment, like in South Australia and in parts of New South Wales and Victoria, where there's no food, you can't access any food for your animals, and it's dry, and rain's been spasmodic, and all these challenges. And one of the things, and I'm into this, everything moves in cycles, in circles. We can go back into history and see droughts and floods and all that. And this is just one of those cycles, but they are getting more severe. Like you only have to go into, central South Australia to see that, or, in the riverland of South Australia to see how devastating it is. And I think just the pressures, the financial pressures of getting bigger, where farms, I was at a field days yesterday, and there was a piece of machinery there, and it was worth $1.2 million. Like, it's just like big dollars. Like, and that piece of machinery you use for 6 weeks of every year, and then it gets parked in the shed. Like, it's so there's big dollars involved. So that pressure and that. So even though they are expecting them, the decisions that you have to make around them can be different for everybody. But I think one of the things that impacts, particularly when a drought's really severe or a bushfire or anything like that, is that the emotional impact that it has. Like you can just feel driving in, or like, and I've done work in Lismore in northern New South Wales around the floods and bushfire working at, and you can just feel the impact that those things have, even though they were kind of expected. Some of the disasters that we've had in the last 6 years are, they're the first time anyone's experienced that stuff, like to that magnitude. Like bushfires, for example, there's been bushfires in Australia just as big as, say, the Black Summer bushfires, but the population growth is now means it impacts a lot more people, so that makes it a bigger disaster than it was back then. Yeah. So
whether it's a $1.2 million piece of machinery at a field day, or whether it's a young couple that's just making their way in the world, and they want their kids to have the next big plasma TV or whatever they are, because there's a degree of stress and a whole lot of personal issues that go along with that. In spite of Australia as a community being more open to mental health challenges, there's still a stigma, though, isn't there, to be in the real stakes, isn't there?
Yeah, and that pressure's real. So just to touch on that, I was having a conversation with someone yesterday, and I don't know what you were like, Guy, but like for us, like we built a house on the farm. We never had curtains for 12 months. We had sheets hanging up on the windows. But now, as you said, we've got to have the plasma tally. But the realisation when you've been through a challenge like I have, that could all change tomorrow. If you rock into work and they say your job's no longer here, and all of a sudden you're all geared up for, which I was geared up. I hold total responsibility for that. I was, fairly highly geared in my business because I had to be, because I brought mum and dad out of the farm. A lot of younger people these days are really highly geared as well. So it only takes, that conversation when you rock up to work tomorrow morning to say your job's no longer there to flip your world on its head. So, that's a challenge. But talking, and then the impact that has on mental health and well-being is huge. And as you said, we are open to talking about it. And I talk about it now. My mission's in 3 parts. It's about creating awareness and education around mental health and wellbeing. But I've realised now, particularly in the last 15 months, that there's plenty of awareness. We all know about it. Like there's all the days, the mental health days, footy rounds, they have mental health rounds, all that stuff. But the thing is, we're still not talking enough about it. And the statistics tell us that we're not talking enough about it. The suicide statistics in our country aren't going down, even though there's all this money. So we have to change the way we're doing things. It's and how we deliver those messages and how we try and encourage people to talk more, because we need to have those tough conversations. And it's like even you're talking to someone and you just say, "G'day," and you don't even have the time to stop to get the answer. You're normally already gone. Where, we need to stop and have real conversations, sit down and actually talk, or stand there and give that person some time, particularly if you think they're struggling, just so they can either have the opportunity to share or just to say, "No, I'm okay."
Mm. And we talked before about, droughts and floods and bushfires and all of those and natural, I guess, things that happen to farmers. But these days, farmers are dealing with so much more than I guess your parents would have dealt with, or farmers 50 years ago, when we've got environmental issues.
Yep.
We've got companies wanting to stick wind turbines up on farms. We've got animal rights people coming on and telling you what to do. There are even just the technology around running a farm. You mentioned about farms are a lot bigger. They're huge businesses now.
Yeah.
But the technology in running a farm these days, you could argue, does help save money and time for farmers. But it's a completely different world than it was as a farmer now in 2025 than it was in 1965.
And I think you can say that about farming or anything, any business. Technology and the layers of pressure are so huge now. Like there's, the expectations, whether that's just as simple as that, expectations of thinking, well, geez, next door neighbour have got a flash new car, I'm feeling the pressure kind of thing, or just those pressures and all those things like government policies. There's, as you said, one of the biggest things in rural communities at the moment, whether people want to talk about it or not, which is another whole, one of these conversations, is that the impact that renewables projects are having within our communities are ripping them apart. Like I've got an example of at a local footy club in Victoria where a few of the players won't even get changed in the club rooms. They get changed in their cars because the footy club's sponsored by a renewables project. And it's just ripping those communities apart. Generational neighbours aren't talking to each other.
Because some people will take the wind turbine option.
And that's okay.
And other people...
I understand that. Oh, look, I've sold cows to China and I've sold water down the river. I know the things that you have to do to stay in business. Putting a renewables project on your farm, like a solar farm or turbines, is a business decision, but it shouldn't become personal and rip communities apart. And it's one of the things I'm really working hard at at the moment is in those communities is to just get people, well, one, we need more kindness in our world and we need conversation, and don't just, because doesn't matter if it's in a rural community or in an urban community. One little story that starts here can be big by the time it gets over there, and there's no truth to the story over here. It's a matter of we need to sit down and have robust conversations with all the stakeholders to find out where they sit and have a greater understanding of everyone's challenge, because the renewables projects have got challenges. The people that are agreeing to put them on their farms have got challenges, and so are the other people, and it's just no one wants to talk.
A lot of these things creep up on you as well, don't they? That drip feed sort of thing, whether you're living in the bush or you're in the burbs. What are some of the signs that you should be aware of yourself to say, because by the time you're thinking, I can't cope, I don't know what to do, it's almost too late, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think it's just that feeling, I suppose feeling of dread, but when things start to build up and you can feel that pressure, well, you need to talk to someone then. and not just let it keep snowballing. And that's what I did. Like, I should have been talking about how I was feeling, or the impact that was, whether it was the flood, which was a massive thing because I'd never experienced anything like that before, or whether it was the family bust up or the drought. I needed to be talking to people about it. And it is, like you say, it's just like a slow dripping tap, and all of a sudden your bucket's full. And I think it's having tools in your toolbox to have that realisation, or my bucket's quarter of the way full now. I need to implement some of my strategies to keep it there and not let it get any fuller. So that's probably a good analogy, that drip one, because by the time you realise your bucket's full and it's overflowing, that's where you don't want to get to. So I think it's just having a range of tools that suit you, and one of those tools is that tool of recognition and understanding. Well, this is not how and then the people around you also having those tools. Like, say, one of the analogies that I use in a talk, if you expected your neighbour or your best friend or someone from the community to be here tonight and they're not, how come? And there could be 1,000 reasons why they're not there, but that should be enough of a seed planted in your mind to say, maybe I should just give them a call tomorrow and say, g'day, and how you going? And that's one of the arts, I think, because we're so full on it in life these days, whether it's, got to get that done because we've got to be here or there, or we don't have that that thought process of, we just need to slow down and have a real conversation. Like, how you going? Yep. I'm already in the car and driving away before you've said, oh, actually, I'm not going any good. Like, so we need to slow everything down. Everything's so fast paced at the moment.
Do you think technology and social media, and we hear the stories, are they bringing us together, or are they tearing us apart a little bit more?
So once again, I've got two views on that. I wouldn't have a business without social media, because that's how I built the Unbreakable Farmer on Facebook, basically. So for me, it's a good thing, but we're more connected than ever before, but we're so disconnected at the same time. So social media is, I watch, and this is no disrespect to younger people, because my kids, I've got 5 kids of my own, where, they'll communicate by text message. Or I was talking to someone the other day, I said, oh, where'd you bump into them? Oh, no, it was just over a Facebook message. Well, that's not talking. And and I'm a bit of not a handshaker, I'm a bit of a hugger, so nothing like a good hug. And you can't do that through, or you can do a virtual emoji or whatever. Like, I'm getting old, I'm really old, because I don't even know how to do that stuff. But you can do an emoji or something like that to say that you're hugging, but that's not the same. Like, me and a couple of my mates, one of my mates in particular, I don't think we've ever shook hands. Like, and all my friends that meet him go, God, he gives good hugs. Like, and so we're just huggers, and and there's nothing that beats that, and you can't replicate that on social media. And it's the same thing as you've got I'm lucky, I've got a good ground, people that keep me grounded. So my 5 kids and my wife keep me pretty grounded. Don't get ahead of yourself, kind of thing. And just because you've been doing this or doing that, or everyone knows who you are, or whatever it is, and that's hard to handle as well. It's a whole different podcast, I think. But they keep me grounded. So, to think that you've got all these friends in the world, you haven't. Having all these friends on Facebook doesn't necessarily, like, I use my weeding process now in Facebook. If I see someone down the street and they haven't got the time to say g'day, I generally, when I get back to my phone or back to my computer, I delete that person, regardless if you've known them for years. Because if they haven't got the time to cross the street or say g'day to you in the street, well, they're not worth they don't need to see anything that I put up on social media. Not that I use it too much these days personally. It's all about business, but they're not real friends. Like,
they're often like postage stamps.
Yeah,
I relate them to postage stamps, and as you say, unless you're prepared to come across the street, say g'day, and that's another thing too. You hear the stories of, we didn't know they were having problems.
Yeah,
or we would never have been able to tell.
Yeah.
how do you surmount that? And how do you start those conversations? Because, as I say, there's still a stigma, regardless of how much we talk about it, how much is in the media, whether footy weekends are devoted to it. How do you start those conversations with your mates or your loved ones?
So one of the things, and this is getting pretty deep, but the thing that I dislike, I shouldn't use that word hate, but I dislike hearing is you go into a community and there's been a death by suicide, and it's the biggest funeral that town, everyone says it's the biggest funeral we've ever seen. What's gone wrong? Why, if that person was so loved, what's gone wrong? And then you sit down and talk, say it's in a rural community, I get the privilege of being called in to sit down and talk with those people post like a suicide, and you sit there and you talk and they go, we didn't see it coming. But then they start talking about those subtle things that we need to look for. So, we talk about what are the signs of to look for when someone's struggling, and it's, change of behaviour, change of whatever that is, so they're angry, sad, frustrated, they start to isolate themselves. There are all these big things. And then you start talking and then they go, I actually, about 3 weeks ago, he stopped coming to footy training on a Tuesday night, and that was out of character. But we didn't think anything of it because he's busy at the moment, or hadn't seen him at this event, or the same thing, or he usually the first person that's cooking the barbie and he now not cooking the barbie. What's going on? Yeah. So instead of just saying, that's okay, we need to have the courage to have those conversations and intervene and stick our nose in. Because one of the things that my speaking mentor, he actually poked fun at me one day on a Zoom call that I did for another group that he was mentoring, and I was talking about the two friends, and one friend sees his friend might be struggling a little bit, but doesn't want to stick his nose in because he doesn't want to upset him, because he might run the risk of him never talking to him again. And then the other friend sees the same friend struggling and he goes, actually, this is life-threatening, and he called the emergency services to do a welfare check on him. But this friend also knew that by doing that friend's never going to talk to him again. But I know which friend I'd rather be, because this friend's got to live with, if something drastic happened, he's got to live with that forever. So I think we've got to have the courage. We get told not to stick our nose in other people's businesses, but if you're close to someone or you work with someone and you've got a bit of a relationship and you notice something going wrong, it's only just an act of kindness to ask how they're going, and not that you want to stick their nose in, but just to let them know that they've got someone there to support them. Because and whether that's as we've said, that's not just farming, that's in everyday life, and particularly when there's been a massive change in someone's life as well, we need to be a bit more aware of those little things that could be impacting people.
If you had your life over again, would you do anything differently?
Great question. In regards to farming, no, because I wouldn't be here talking to you today. Would I have liked to have not faced the challenges that I've faced? Yeah, that would be good. Losing everything that you've got, financially is not very pleasant. But one of the things that always often gets told to me about my kids is that they've got a great work ethic. They're always, they're great people. And I was born out of being kids on a farm, and I would never change that. And the opportunity that I had, and I see my son, who's managing a farm now, has with his kids, where they're out in the paddock and or sitting in the tractor or doing whatever with him, and that time that you get to enjoy with your kids that no other people it's a privilege as a farmer to do that. Wouldn't change any of that. There's lots of things that I'd love to change, but I'd do it all over again. But who would have thought that I'd be a professional speaker when I thought I'd be still a dairy farmer? So that's probably one of the messages that are from my journey, is that there's always hope. There's a way of reinventing yourself as well. Like, so that's one of the things I don't really pay much attention to. But when I think about it, like, I was a kid that dropped out of school, started farming, didn't think that would amount to anything. Ended up running a fairly successful business, faced a couple of challenges that just tipped that over the edge, but was able to then reinvent myself and do what I do now. It's just kind of...
But hang on, you're brushing over that, because you jumped into financial broking, you did a whole bunch, you did whatever you needed to do. So you were able to turn your hand to whatever needed to be done to support your family. And I think I've heard you describe yourself as not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I think you really undersell yourself.
Yeah.
I think the fact that you're here today and you got through all of that is amazing testimony to who you are.
But I think that, and I'm glad you touched on that, because all those little things that I did, and I make fun of them in my talk, like I did finance broking, but the kids got sick of eating baked beans because I was no good at it. But the things that I learnt through that, and then doing real estate for 3 years, it was a challenging time to do real estate, and I wasn't really successful at it, but it was probably just timing again. Timing's everything, in farming, in life. But then I used to sit around tables with people that were making critical decisions in their life because the kids had gone away to uni and they didn't want to come back to the farm, and they had to sell their farm, which was their identity, not just their farm. And I was used to sit there and take my hat off basically as a real estate agent, become a counsellor. And that's planted some of the seeds to what I did. So everything that I've done has built to what I am today. Like, so yeah, that's why anyone, you always, I think you will always have some semblance of regret in your life, but everything you do builds you to where you are today. And as long as you're taking the good things out of it and you can use them to be positive and move forward, well, that's part of the story as well.
What would you say to someone who may be listening or watching who's not ready to talk yet, but they're prepared to listen?
Yeah. And I have that, I have one of the interesting things sharing my story now, which is part of that mission, inspiring conversations by sharing mine, hopefully gives you the permission to share yours. Part of my mission is that I'll have people sitting in an audience, they won't come up and talk, and then they might not message you next week or the week after, but then all of a sudden a random message, which I got this week, which just blew me away, from a lady, which is a perfect example of that, and just, telling you the impact that your talk had on them and how it made the decision, gave them, I suppose, the mindset and decision-making process to go and seek some help. And that's okay as long as those people are listening, and you've got to be open. Like, so the old adage, you can't lead a horse to water and make it drink. Like, you've just got to keep planting the seeds, and that's what I see. Because sometimes doing what I do now as a speaker can be very it's very rewarding, don't get me wrong, but it can be unrewarding because you can just look out at an audience and think, and this is my internal dialogue going off as well, and part of my mental health challenge that I've got. Are they listening? But then all of a sudden, out of the blue, you'll get a message from a bloke and go, or a lady in the audience, and they'll go, "Yeah, I heard that," and I implemented that strategy, or I decided to build my own toolbox, or I had one guy, and he's a perfect example. I'm an In Excess fan. So now we are showing our age. That's very appropriate. So Michael Hutchence was like, if I could, as you can see, I haven't got Michael Hutchence type of hair, but I wish I did. But one of the things, if you read anything about Michael Hutchence, he was kind of short-sighted, and every concert that he did was, why it was so good is because it was an intimate concert. Even at Wembley, to 70 or 80,000 people, he could only see so far out into the audience. So that's why he was so good. Well, that's why I believe he was so good as a front man. I do the same thing, and that's part of one of my coping mechanisms on stage. So I'll try and pick out 4 or 5 people in the audience. Not that I'm ignoring everyone else, but I'll have individual conversations that keeps me focused. Anyway, this room, this guy I could see he was fidgeting, wondered what was going on. And I always say to people, if you're struggling, you can leave, and I don't get offended, but just give me a thumbs down. Well, he didn't give me anything, and he walked out of the room, and he didn't come back in. And I just kind of tried to tell the people that were the organisers to maybe go out and see him, trying to gesture to him. Anyway, as I walked out of the room afterwards, he was walking back towards me. And as he walked past me, he just said, "Thanks, mate," just like that. And then he walked straight up to his manager, and then he come back to me, and I said, and he goes, I want to talk to you now. And I said, yeah. And he goes, "I was just listening to you talking about, you should reach out. So I've been estranged from my son for about 5 years, and we haven't really talked, and he's moved away, and you just made me just twig something that you said twigged something in me, and so I decided to ring him and just say they haven't spoken for 5 years, but his partner answered the phone, and she said, this is very timely because he's just been rushed to hospital, and it's life-threatening. So while he was walking past me and only just said, "Thanks, mate," he was going to his manager to say, "I'm leaving. I've already booked a flight," because he had to fly to Western Australia, and I'm going now. And it was just a life chat. And he's messaged me since then, and just so I said something in one little word or one little phrase that just triggered that. I need to ring my son. And
and we're all capable of that, aren't we?
Yeah.
With people around us, is you could just reach out and just say one little thing you might say might just be.
And I think that's why I share that little bit of that story, is that it only takes one word or one gesture, or even just that silent sitting and holding space for someone to change their life.
You don't have to fix it.
You don't have to.
Sometimes it's just about listening, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that stops the conversation from happening, because we all get a bit scared. And we all think we've got to have advice and answers where we don't. Sometimes we just got to sit and listen. And that's part of this fast-paced world where we just don't have that time to sit and listen anymore. And we should build that into our toolbox so we can...
I refer to that as standing in the pain with someone.
Yeah.
You just be with them and stand, as uncomfortable as it is, and you can't fix it because quite often there's nothing you can do. Just to stand with them in their pain and not say anything is often a lot more valuable.
And as you said, all these things that I've done along the way, walking up a driveway after the Black Summer bushfires to a farmer who'd just lost everything, house, everything. The only thing that he was thankful for is they evacuated and he didn't lose his family, which was that's a good thing. But to stand and watch a bloke who's covered in soot looking over his farm and everything's gone, everything. Utes are parked next to us, they're all burnt out, everything's gone. What do you do? What can you do? And all I could do was I put my hand on his shoulder and didn't say, we never even talked, and I just put my hand on his shoulder and just, as you said, stood there in that pain with him, because what else can you say?
Everyone's carrying something. You don't need to be a mental health professional to help. If people want to find out more about yourself, the Unbreakable Farmer, where do they go? What do they do?
You can find me anywhere. Apparently you can. On my website's www.theunbreakablefarmer.com.au. I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. I like sharing what I do, just so people can see that it only takes one of those little conversations to change someone's life. So
sometimes you just need to be human, to care, and importantly to notice, don't you?
Yep, just notice, but have that courage to start that conversation.
Warren Davies, thanks so much for joining Kaylee and myself on the Big 6-0. Wish you all the very best.
No, thanks for having me. Pleasure.
The views and opinions expressed on the Big 6-0 are personal and reflect those of the hosts and guests. They do not represent the views or positions of any affiliated organisations or companies. This podcast is intended for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be construed as professional advice. Please consult with a qualified professional for guidance on any personal matters.
And before we go, let's give credit where credit is due. Kaylee Harris and I came up with all the genius content for this week's episode. Our producer, Nick Abood, well, he keeps the lights on and makes sure we don't accidentally upload a cat video instead of a podcast. So thanks for keeping us on track, Nick. Nick?